Self-driving cars, air taxis, high-speed rail.
These are the things that are coming, and we all know they're coming. We just don't know when they're going to get here.
What will transportation look like in 30, 40, or 50 years?
Are we going to send our kids to school in self-driving cars?
Of course you would. You think traffic is bad outside an elementary school now? Just imagine.
How will cities and towns fund and manage the infrastructure needs that come with new technology?
A lot of the challenges are just overcoming the fear of the unknown.
And what are the social impacts of technology that could change the way we interact with the world?
The vision of all of us in robot-driven cars by ourselves is a dystopian vision, in my opinion. That is not utopian.
While Washington state officials are planning for all the changes that could come, they are looking to the other Washington for support.
This is something that could literally steer us in a completely different direction as a nation.
It's an effort more than 50 years in the making. What the federal government is doing to help get high-speed rail lines up and running in the Northwest and across the country.
We really wanted to provide some resources to help cities and communities use new technologies.
And the legislation that could help increase the use of smart cities technology and how it can help improve transportation systems.
We want to make sure that technologies that can help a driver or a fleet in general to do a better job are available to them and that they're used whenever they can.
And how the trucking industry is using technology to help make roads safer.
From the capital of Washington state
to the capital of the United States, this is Washington to Washington.
Hello and welcome to Washington to Washington. I'm Jennifer Huntley in Washington State at a Tesla supercharging station in Centralia. People driving from Seattle to Portland can use one of the 20 superchargers that are available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. More and more drivers may be stopping at places like this instead of gas stations in the future.
And I'm Tammy Thuringer in Washington, D.C. This is our second episode looking at transportation, and this time we're focusing on the future of transportation and how policies and politics in both Washingtons play a role in what that might look like.
That's right, Tammy. In our first episode, we explored funding and infrastructure and learned about the challenges of funding a system that is at a breaking point in terms of maintenance on our state and federal highways. We spoke with lawmakers on the front lines of transportation funding and policy in this state. They told us, given the needs in our state and the lack of federal support, another funding package may be on the horizon.
The time is now. It's going to take us a while to be able to put together an agreement, both on the size of the package, the revenue that's needed, the kinds of revenue that's needed, and what projects are going to get funded. We've got, big demands.
In the grand scheme of things, this is pretty close on the heels of the last package. We're still in the throes of that. These projects are still being funded. They're still being, some haven't even started yet within the context of that Connecting Washington package. So it's tough when you start talking revenue only, although we know that things are changing.
In this episode, we go beyond the debate over funding transportation today to the future of funding and the future of transportation in general, such as expanded light rail and self-driving cars. What will our cities and towns look like in 5, 10, 50 years? It's a question that state lawmakers are asking as they try to map out transportation legislation for the future.
Everyone's talking about electrification.
As the chair of the State Senate Transportation Committee, Senator Steve Hobbs has spent plenty of time thinking about what transportation might look like in the future.
I think Washington State is way ahead of other states because we're setting up the work groups.
Last legislative session, Hobbs proposed an ambitious $17 billion 10-year transportation plan that addressed future needs. It didn't make it out of committee, but Hobbs says the plan should get people thinking about the kinds of cars they drive.
We still have time on it. Only 2% of the vehicles right now are electric. So I think what we have to do is just be prepared, Mike. So when the time comes, or when the time will come, let's look how we're going to do this.
With lagging revenue from the gas tax and a future that is leaning toward less reliance on fossil fuels, lawmakers are looking for another way of funding new roads and maintenance. One idea, a road usage charge. What is it? A charge drivers would pay based on how many miles they drive, not how much gas they consume. The approach is similar to how people pay for their utilities, including electricity and water. A pilot project run by the Washington State Transportation Commission had 2,000 drivers track and report their mileage over the last year and provide feedback to state officials. The system would use technology inside cars, which raises privacy issues.
A lot of the challenges are just overcoming the fear of the unknown. For example, a lot of the maybe folks my age and older they don't want to be tracked, right? But millennials, like my kids, they know they're being tracked and they don't care.
A miles traveled charge for vehicles, a carbon fee, whatever the mechanism, one thing is certain: the state needs to find a replacement for the long, reliable gas tax. Hobbs plans to introduce a bill this upcoming session that would impact electric car owners.
This is 5 years out. Electric vehicles will have a choice, either pay a fee or go to the road usage charge. So that's what I'm kind of thinking as we go forward.
The road usage charge has a long way to go before I think we look at implementation.
In eastern Washington, Senator Curtis King says talk of a road usage charge is a big concern for residents, who he says are already getting the short end of the stick with miles driven.
If you think about our side of the state, we're really paying a road usage charge now. We just don't call it that. If you have a car that gets 20 miles to the gallon and you live 20 miles outside of the city and you work in the city, you burn a gallon of gas every day going in and coming back. So a gallon of gas, you have a state tax of 49.5 cents. 20 miles, it's about 2.5 cents. A mile is what you're paying in a road usage charge.
Getting the technology into cars to collect the road usage charge is another issue.
The cost to collect a road usage charge is somewhere between 10 and 12 cents per dollar, where collect the gas tax is like 0.5 cent per dollar. So you got to make that 10% up somewhere.
One idea from Senator King: make the rate per mile dependent on miles driven.
Everybody that drives 5,000 miles pays a certain rate. If you drive 10,000 miles a year, you pay a little less for the next 5,000, and then as you go to 15, you pay a little less, so that we reduce the burden.
Senator King says the divide between eastern and western Washington can be evident in the way people travel, meaning transportation also represents an area's values.
When you get on a bus or you get on light rail, you've lost your freedom. If I'm driving my car, I know I can get in my car. It may take me longer, but I know I can get there, and I can go pick up my kid. I can go and pick up something on my way home. I can go visit my friend in the hospital. There's all kinds of things that having your own vehicle gives you. That's a freedom, and I think people like the fact that they have that freedom and that choice, and they're willing to put up with a lot to be able to maintain that freedom.
Senator King acknowledges that technology might change people's reliance on cars.
The technology is going to have great effects on us. Smaller cars, cars that drive themselves.
And even when technology seems to be moving fast.
But we have to slow roll this thing. We don't want to make mistakes. For example, there was a little study that came out about autonomous vehicles, and they put out a stop sign. An autonomous vehicle stopped, did its sensors, and then moved on. Then they took the same stop sign, put 2 white dots on it, and the vehicle read it as 45 miles an hour and blew right past it. So let's take this a little slow, but it is coming, and we have to be prepared for that.
So who will pay for the changes needed to support high-tech transport? Hobbs says there will need to be partnerships between local governments and the private sector, as well as the federal government.
Right now, just looking, states are doing it by themselves, and I think in the end, they're going to probably want a framework that covers the entire United States.
As for the big question, what will our highways and roadways look like in 50 years?
I can envision a tube that from Seattle to Spokane, you get in these little capsules, maybe 8 of you, and you just shoot over to Spokane. If you need to get off at Ellensburg, this little gate opens up and you pull off. Not everybody has to do it, but you do it.
A federal grant helped pay for the study that looked at a road usage charge and how it might work for drivers. But Senator Hobbs and Senator King agree that the federal government needs to do more to help fund the changing landscape of transportation. Congress is exploring another way of travel, high-speed rail. Tammy, what can you tell us about this?
Hi, Jennifer. High-speed rail has been touted as the transportation of the future, and efforts are underway in both Washingtons to make it a reality.
In a country that spans a continent, modern transportation is vital to continued growth. I will recommend heavier reliance on competition in transportation. I will ask for funds to study high-speed rail transportation between urban centers. We will begin with test projects between Washington and Boston. On high-speed trains, passengers could travel this distance in less than 4 hours.
President Lyndon Johnson made those comments while delivering his 1965 State of the Union address. That same year, Congress passed the High-Speed Ground Rail Transportation Act, and President Johnson signed it into law as part of his Great Society's policy initiatives. Yet 54 years later,
we don't have any at this time.
Andy Coons, president of the U.S. High-Speed Rail Association, says despite the lack of progress, high-speed rail will become a reality.
Little by little, the pieces are starting to come together. We laid out a coherent national map like our interstate highway system, connecting every state, all the major cities, in a seamless system where you could just move all over the country with ease.
Art Gazzetti, Vice President of Mobility Initiatives and Public Policy at the American Public Transportation Association, agrees high-speed rail in the U.S. has a long way to go, but says we have the seeds for a great system that would be a boon for the economy.
One of the key benefits of high-speed rail is the broader connection with markets and labor. That's what an agglomeration economy, we call that. Well, what high-speed rail does, it will connect, call it a mega region, one population center, say in Portland to Seattle to Vancouver, BC. And the more you connect them in a quick way, you have a bigger economy to access more economic activity, higher productivity in the region, and just in general, more economic output.
Efforts to create a Cascadia mega region is decades in the making. The 462-mile Pacific Northwest corridor runs from Eugene, Oregon to Vancouver, British Columbia. It was federally designated as a high-speed rail corridor by the Intermodal Surface Transportation Efficiency Act of 1991. More recently, several studies looking at the possibility of building an ultra-high-speed rail line from Portland to Vancouver, BC have been done. Another is expected to be finished by the end of next year. So what could Washington State's high-speed rail line look like? According to the Washington State Department of Transportation, multiple types of technology for the system are being studied, but one might have an advantage.
Every system in the world, major commercial systems, are all the same, more or less the same technology. It's steel wheel trains on steel track, the same traditional type track. It's just all perfected to the highest levels. So the straightest track, even the steel they use in the track is higher grade, and the way they weld it is higher grade.
It might not sound high-tech, but that conventional steel wheel on steel rail technology has a maximum design speed of 250 miles per hour. Maglev uses superconductive magnets to hover train cars above an electric track with a maximum design speed of 375 miles per hour. But the technology isn't being used beyond 2 small tracks in China and Japan.
We don't really know if maglev is ever going to have an application. It is proven to work, although we've heard that it can cost up to 5 times more per mile to build, and it uses an enormous amount of energy. And we don't know, because it's not in full commercial operation anymore, we don't know what kind of maintenance requirements are involved.
Even less is known about the actual capabilities of Hyperloop. While it also uses a magnetized track, it's designed to move pods or capsules through a depressurized tube either above or below ground. It's said to have a maximum design speed of more than 700 miles per hour, but it isn't currently being used anywhere.
We just don't see that Hyperloop is anywhere near ready for prime time. I mean, it hasn't gone through any of the research and testing steps that it takes any kind of a new technology.
Gazzetti says lesser used and still in development technologies shouldn't be ignored, but it also shouldn't hold up progress.
Innovation is a good thing. We should constantly be probing for new ideas and ways to do things in perhaps a different and more efficient way. However, having said that, we have technology that's here right now high-speed steel-on-steel technology.
Definitions of high-speed rail vary, but the Cascadia corridor trains would run at more than 200 miles per hour, shuttling riders from Vancouver, BC to Seattle and Seattle to Portland in less than an hour. In areas like the Northwest, Gazzetti says high-speed rail is the best way to keep people moving.
The future of high-speed rail in the United States is a matter of mathematics. United States continues to grow, our economy continues to grow. The growth tends to be clustered in these cities and mega regions. The capacity of those places, the highway system's not going to be able to do it alone, and they're not going to be able to expand. You can't just keep building lanes. The highways are built up and they're very congested. Airports, very hard to build a new airport these days. High-speed rail can be the complement to those, giving you the capacity you need to growth and actually making that growth possible.
Development and construction of the Cascadia line would require government involvement at all levels, including a new federal council. The Non-Traditional and Emerging Transportation Technology Council will address oversight gaps created by emerging technologies that fall under the jurisdiction of the DOT. In July, Transportation Secretary Elaine Chao spoke about the new council that will help local and state governments with projects like high-speed rail and self-driving cars.
We don't really have a place that can respond to informational requests from people who want to know what the government's role is. And because it was new, it was kind of intimidating too. So we set up this new emerging transportation technology council that would bring all the heads of these various offices together and provide a one-place shop for new and emerging technology innovators.
The federal government will also likely be involved when it comes to funding the project. WashDOT's preliminary ultra-high-speed ground transportation feasibility study estimated the initial capital cost for the rail line at between $24 and $42 billion. But Kuhn says, unlike other transportation systems, once built, high-speed rail networks are almost always self-sufficient.
Not only do they not have to be subsidized, they actually make a sizable profit. So the profit can be used to then expand the system. It can be used to pay down the initial investment, or it can just be used to subsidize other things like a new light rail or other things that don't necessarily make money.
Several other states, including Texas and Florida, are looking to build high-speed rail lines, and California's high-speed rail line is currently under construction. When finished, the train will run from Los Angeles to San Francisco, but it's hit several bumps along the way. According to the Los Angeles Times, as of February, the project was 13 years behind schedule and $44 billion over budget. Earlier this year, the Federal Railroad Administration announced it terminated a 2010 agreement with the California High-Speed Rail Authority, and it would pull a nearly $929 million federal grant for the project, saying it had failed to make reasonable progress. Some fear the problems with California's high-speed rail project could impact other efforts to build high-speed rail lines across the country, but Andy Coons with the U.S. High-Speed Rail Association says California's struggles are something other states can learn from to help their projects run smoother. Jennifer?
Thanks, Tammy. So what role should the private sector have in helping drive transportation policy decisions? And how connected is government to the transportation innovations happening in business? That and more just ahead. Welcome back to Washington. When it comes to technology and transportation, the private sector seems to be moving at a record pace with innovating new products and ideas. But it's clear they can't do it alone, and federal, state, and local governments will need to play a part.
These are hybrids, so this is a little bit of a pivot towards electrification.
Devin Lydell is showing us around the Teague offices in Seattle and a new project with Segway, designing utility vehicles with an eye to the future.
They're not full electric. This round isn't, but that's where they're headed. And of course, that's where everything's headed.
The global design company, founded in 1926, has a history of designing iconic consumer products, such as the Kodak camera, the Pringles chip canister, and the familiar brown UPS truck. But it is also known for collaborating for more than 70 years with Boeing, designing the insides of its airplanes and shaping the future of air and space travel.
Working in aviation has made us experts in how to design small spaces that move. And that has a natural carryover into things like these, things like anything that's in motion that involves a passenger being inside of it. So I think that's one of the central reasons why we're involved in mobility the way we are.
Liddell is a principal futurist at Teague, so you can bet that he spends a lot of time thinking about what cities and towns might look like and how design and technology will intersect to hopefully make it easier for all people to get where they're going.
One of the words you hear a lot of in transportation literature is this notion of seamless. And seamless is a total fantasy. Seamless does not exist. And in fact, actually, the better design opportunities are within the seams. When I think about like how a smart city of the future is actually going to have to work, it is about designing those new seams.
An example Liddell gives is the sidewalk curb.
Most of our cities are essentially designed for people to drive in and park, and then they walk from their parking spot to wherever they're going. Now, actually, what we have is we have a lot of people who are being dropped off by rideshare companies, or they're being dropped off by, or they're getting off of a bus, or whatever there is. The curb is actually sort of a friction point for those changes. So one way to think about this is that the curb is quickly devolving into basically an arrivals and departures zone that you might see at an airport.
Liddell says the curb will be a dynamic and ever-changing piece of infrastructure in the future and used differently based on if people are moving by scooter, autonomous vehicle, or even flying taxis.
I actually believe we will see flying taxis before we see fully autonomous vehicles. That sounds perhaps unusual and maybe unexpected, but one of the reasons I'm thinking that is that the actual tasks in front of us in terms of creating fully autonomous vehicles that maneuver ground-based scenarios is a very difficult design challenge. It's a difficult policy challenge. There's all sorts of things that have to be sorted out. The task of actually moving a battery-powered air taxi from one rooftop to another isn't necessarily less daunting, but it is more straightforward.
Will cities and rural areas have similar access to transportation technologies? Liddell doesn't think so.
I sort of see a widening gulf between urban areas and rural areas, where as more and more of us move into cities, our access to those technologies will be part of the urban experience. And that will likely be different than if you're not in an urban setting. So I could see actually a scenario in which we have a widening gulf between the urban and the rural. How that plays out, I think, is a bit open-ended, but it's one of concern for me.
Liddell says it will take a number of minds working together to reimagine transportation in cities and towns throughout Washington and beyond.
It's a humongous mistake to think that brands or an entity can do it by themselves. These things are so complicated. They're only going to be possible through really, really powerful partnerships.
He says those partnerships need to happen between the private and public sector, since both have specific areas of expertise.
This is something where government needs to continue leaning in and offering their own superpowers. There are plenty of scenarios where government has expertise and know-how that the private sector does not. And this is an awesome opportunity for government to contribute its superpowers to these unanswered questions.
As for how the public moves around in the future,
the vision of all of us in robot-driven cars by ourselves is a dystopian vision, in my opinion. That is not utopian.
Liddell believes designers, inventors, and public policy officials must keep a sense of community at the heart of whatever comes next.
If you think about the ride share of the future, the necessity to ride with strangers, but also not be bothered, but also to feel safe, but at the same time also feel like we are part of a community, that's a rich design challenge. That is a very rich design challenge, and to our earlier discussion, only accomplishable through the contributions of the private and the public sector.
One partnership that involves public and private entities is the concept of smart cities, using technology to support infrastructure and help cities run more efficiently. Legislation proposed in Congress this year is aimed at supporting and funding smart cities. Tammy, you've been looking into this from DC. What's the latest?
That's right, Jennifer. The number of internet-connected devices is expected to grow to more than 22 billion by 2021. And some lawmakers want to use that connectivity to help improve transportation systems.
We really wanted to provide some resources to help cities and communities use new technologies. We know not everyone wants to be the first one to try a new technology. So if we can have pilot programs happen across the country, make sure those learnings are shared and bring information together so that help inform all sorts of communities what works where, what to look out for.
Two Washington state lawmakers, Congresswoman Del Bene and Senator Maria Cantwell, recently reintroduced their Smart Cities and Communities Act. The legislation was originally introduced in 2017, but it didn't make it out of committee. Del Bene says she's working to educate her fellow lawmakers on the benefits and impact the legislation could have.
When we talk about technologies, sometimes different members of Congress have different awareness in terms of technologies and how they work. And so, one, I think we're continuing to work with members both in the House and the Senate to help them be aware of the need.
Goals of the bill include improving federal coordination of smart city programs, helping local governments implement smart cities technologies, building the workforce's technology skills to support smart cities, and improving smart city technologies' quality, performance, and safety. Those goals could mean a better overall experience for drivers and those using public transportation systems. Several cities in Washington state currently use smart cities technologies and see the benefits.
The application of smart city technologies, smart city concepts, let's call it mobility integration concepts, are happening as much in the Pacific Northwest, the Seattle region, is happening anywhere in the country. King County Metro, Seattle DOT, Sound Transit, among the leaders nationally in thinking broadly, thinking in a forward-looking way, thinking outside of the box, thinking beyond transit alone. How do all of the pieces come together to help form the complete trip, to help form customer choice, and to help form the efficient transportation network?
According to the Smart America Challenge, city governments are expected to spend more than $40 trillion over the next 20 years to upgrade their infrastructure with smart technology.
We authorize it so that you could have over $200 million authorized, but then it would also be up to the Appropriations Committee to actually put money in there. So it would be able to have up to that much, but it would depend on any given cycle in Congress how much exactly got allocated.
Grants from the proposed legislation could help city governments cover some of the cost. But Gazzetti says the role of the federal government should go beyond funding.
I think a big role for the federal government in smart cities is to incentivize innovation. There's going to be a lot of risk taken as cities and public transit systems move to these new ways of doing business, the new service models. But they shouldn't take risk on their own, because there is going to be a lot of success, there's going to be a lot of failure. The success should be shared and will be shared by everybody.
And it's not just large cities that can benefit from integrating technology into transportation systems.
Any community of any size can really benefit because it can help run basic functions more efficiently. It can also help, remote sensors can tell you where you need to go. So maybe if you have a small workforce in your city or or in a tribal community, that they know where to go, where there might be a problem that needs to be addressed.
The widespread use of technology in transportation isn't without controversy. There are concerns systems connected to the internet could be hacked and privacy concerns about the data collected. Congresswoman Del Bene says lawmakers are aware of the concerns and they're working towards solutions.
We need to create some rules of the road, and I'm a big believer in making sure we do a good job of highlighting how people's personal data would be used and make sure that we're receiving that consent. I've introduced legislation to really make sure that we have a federal privacy law in place to make sure that consumers are in control of their most sensitive personal information.
Both the House and Senate bills were introduced in their respective chambers and referred to the appropriate committees back in May. As of now, no other action on the legislation has been taken. Jennifer?
Thanks, Tammy. When we come back,
We're going to have self-driving cars in 5 years.
Well, yeah, and they've said that for 5 years.
we get a better picture of what the future might look like from someone who has spent decades studying transportation.
Welcome back to Washington. Almost everyone relies on goods moved by the trucking industry, and now technology is helping improve the safety of trucks on the road. According to WashDOT, trucks move an estimated $42 million worth of freight on Washington state roadways every hour of every day. That's good news for commerce, but potentially bad news for safety. Road Safe America, a nonprofit organization promoting road safety, recently analyzed federal data and found between 2009 and 2017, Washington state experienced the largest percentage increase of truck crash fatalities in the country.
We have a lot of theories. Distracted driving, the use of cell phones has gone up, drastically over the last several years. Even with states having recent bans on texting and driving or the use of a handheld device, we still know that distracted driving is a huge factor with crashes.
It's hard to pinpoint the exact cause of crashes, but Dan Horvath, Vice President of Safety Policy at the American Trucking Association, says safety-related technology could help reduce the number of them.
This automatic emergency braking, commonly referred to as AEB, that's technology that can be put in the truck to sense whether something in front of that truck has stopped on a highway or a road, and can alert the driver, and in some cases with additional technology actually apply the brakes and prevent that vehicle from stopping and rear-ending that vehicle.
Horvath calls trucking a diverse industry and points out a one-size-fits-all approach to safety technology likely wouldn't work.
Fleets are going to adopt these technologies based on what works best for them. A fleet operating in the Northeast might not drive under the same conditions than fleets operating in the Midwest or the West Coast. It's preferable to industry to use these technologies and choose the technologies based on what's best for their operations, as compared to a mandate that says you need to have A, B, and C on your fleet no matter where you operate and what type of operation you're in.
Instead, Horvath says the ATA would like to see the federal government incentivize fleets and manufacturers to utilize safety technologies and make them standard on equipment.
What we don't want to see are mandates, and again, because mandates are telling carriers, hey, you need to do this, and that certain safety technology may not be the best fit for that fleet. So we'd like to see an incentivized approach, and then also work with stakeholders to determine what technologies are best utilized in our industry, and how can we encourage fleets to start installing those within their own operations because they want to, not because they're being told to do so.
Several safety technology options are currently available, but not all trucks are equipped and little is mandatory. Horvath says despite the lack of regulatory requirements, the trucking industry is investing in technology on its own.
Trucking industry spends approximately $10 billion a year on safety technologies. ATA did a study here recently that looked at fleets from about 30 different motor carriers, comprising of about 500,000 trucks. And of that 500,000 truck sampling, we were able to determine that over 70% of those fleets are utilizing safety technologies such as automatic emergency braking. So it's pretty good to show that even from that smaller of a number that fleets are adopting AEB technologies voluntarily.
The Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, an agency under the U.S. Department of Transportation, is currently working to educate those in the industry about safety technologies. It's also funded several studies about the effectiveness of driver-assisted systems. Jennifer?
Tammy, it is certainly fun to imagine how our daily lives might look differently 20 to 30 years from now or farther into the future. We asked the director of the Washington State Transportation Center, Mark Hallenbeck, who has worked on transportation issues for the past 30 years, how we might move around in the future. And here's some of what he had to say.
If you live in Ballard and Capitol Hill, you will get rid of your car. You'll get rid of your car because there's always an Uber outside. If you live in Thurston County, you will not. You'll buy your own automated car. And the reason is because it'll take at least 15 minutes for the Uber to come get you in your neighborhood. And if you need an Uber with 3 car seats, it'll take half an hour for that Uber to car. And oh yeah, by the way, I want bike racks from all 3 bikes as well. And that will be a day reservation in advance. And after you've done that twice, you'll buy your own. You will never go to the dry cleaner again. Your car will go to the dry cleaner. Its cell phone will be ring-fenced by your dry cleaner. It will get there, it will call the dry cleaner. The dry cleaner will go, oh yeah, I need ticket 29, because it's attached to your phone, right? They'll pick up 29, it will come out. They will put their phone on your window, right? Just like you do to pick up a car to go right now. It will open the door, they will hang it up, close the door, your Visa card associated with your phone will pay them, your car will come back. You think traffic is bad outside an elementary school now? Just imagine when your automated car can drive you to work and will come back, take the one kid to elementary school, come back, take the next kid to the junior high, come back, next to their, right? But instead, I once owned 4 cars. I had 2 high school boys, right? And they went different places. So we lived in suburbia, so of course we had 4 cars. These behavior changes will come with technology. So automated cars could be great, they could be awful. It all depends on how the regulation of them, who gets to own them, when they get to travel, whether they're allowed to park.
We could put this camera in a self-driving car and could come up and do this interview.
You could.
In the future.
Absolutely you could.
So how much of our lives will be in person, in a car, over the phone, or a screen? The general consensus seems to be that no one knows exactly what the future of transportation will look like or how soon we might see us all in self-driving cars. But clearly, as new technology becomes available, big infrastructure changes to cities and towns is something government and the private sector will need to work together to figure out.
When I think about the future of autonomous vehicles, this is not possible without the expertise and know-how of people who have been planning and designing and implementing complicated transportation networks for decades. This is not something that an automaker by itself will be able to figure out all by itself.
Thank you for joining us for Washington to Washington. We look forward to continuing our focus on the critical issues in this state.
And talking with the people in both places who are working towards solutions. We welcome your feedback on this episode as well as your ideas for future episodes of Washington to Washington.
Engage with us on social media at WA2WA and share your thoughts.
For now, from Washington, D.C., thank you for watching.
And from Washington State, we hope you'll join us next time on Washington to Washington.